Okay, welcome. We are in Senate Institutions. It is Thursday, February 20th, and we are discussing S69, an act related to age-appropriate design code. And we have 4 witnesses today. So let's go around the room and just introduce ourselves. I'm Wendy Harrison. I'm the chair of this committee, and I represent the Windham District.
Senator Russ Eagles, Essex District.
Senator Joe Major, Windsor.
And Rob Plunkett, Bennington.
Senator Sandbox, Orleans County District.
Who is here even though he has constituents. So thank you for being. Okay, so our first witness is Brianna January. So if you would like to come to the witness seat. Some people call it the hot seat, but it's not.
I feel rather comfortable.
Yeah, well, we want to hear from you, and
Thank you.
that's why you're
Appreciate your time.
Yeah, so I understand you are with the State and Local Government Relations of the Progress Chamber. So
Chamber in progress.
Chamber of Progress, okay.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, esteemed committee. Brianna January with Chamber of Progress. We are a tech industry coalition center left. Our members include household names like Amazon, Apple, Google, Uber, etc. But unlike most industry associations, they do not have a vote or veto on our positions. We take our positions as a center left staff. In doing so, I'm the Northeast Director for Government Relations. My first time in Vermont. Very excited to be here. It's been a warm welcome. I'll note that I've prepared some comments, but I do hope that this can be more of a conversation. We want to be very clear that while we are in opposition to S69, online safety is of the utmost priority for us at Chamber of Progress, as well as our partners. And we work all around the country, me in particular, again in the Northeast, on this particular issue to make sure that our young folks are safe and healthy online. That said, we do have some concerns about S69, and we believe that really there are unintended consequences that will ultimately do more harm than good, especially for Vermont's most vulnerable youth, including queer youth and youth of color. We do appreciate that the bill does not have an explicit age verification requirement like a lot of these bills do. However, there are multiple mandates in the bill that in essence would be a de facto age requirement for all users, not just for our young people online. That would not only be a big encroachment on individual privacy for several reasons, but it would also potentially censor online content for, again, Vermont's most vulnerable youth. Namely, the bill has rather broad and underdefined definitions, and a lot of its mandates are subjective, which is what we take issue with. One issue being that there's a 2% threshold. To be frank, 2% threshold for young folks under 17 being online is rather difficult commercially, except for maybe silversingles.com. There's at least 2% of young people accessing pretty much any online service and internet website. That's just a fact, unfortunately. So we're talking about really a wide swath of online services being implemented in the bill, not just social media companies, for example. And the bill text also suggests empowering the Attorney General to establish what the bill calls age assurance guidelines. This is seemingly an acknowledgement of the implicit age verification requirement. What we have concern with around age verification is really the fundamentals of implementing and the ultimate censorship for all users. Age estimation requires gathering a ton of data, whether you're explicitly requiring age verification via submitting your driver's license, for example, and then a social media company has that private data forever, which is rather counterintuitive when I think that we all agree that these online platforms already have a lot of our personal data. That's rather invasive. But also there are issues with the very limited technology that's available for what this bill considers to be the direct language in the bill, age assurance guidelines. We're talking about things like possibly using biometrics, your face, or even there are now technologies that can use your hand movements to estimate your age. From our perspective as a center-left organization, this is problematic because those technologies are inherently flawed and have a lot of bias. Unfortunately, the very few companies that do it, we see extreme bias around Black Americans in particular. They're often overestimated with age using biometrics, and Asian Americans are underestimated. So you're really looking at a very large error margin if we were to use this sort of technology. I'll also note that we agree that, again, these platforms have a lot of personal information and data already, but it's counterintuitive for the state to pass a bill that essentially hands over more of that data. That would be a little problematic, especially from our standpoint as a center-left organization in the context that we're working in at the federal government, in which we see a lot of tech platforms as well as the Trump administration really having a murky future when it comes to having our data and our privacy and what that could mean. Furthermore, our opponents will probably suggest that the bill does not require age verification. I think that I've laid out how we believe that it does so in a roundabout way. But we also do have some concerns with the minimum duty of care provision in S69. Again, well-intentioned, but we think it's, again, overly broad and will have some unintended consequences. The bill imposes liability on businesses for, quote, reasonably foreseeable emotional distress, as well as compulsive use without clearly defining those terms and without objectively enforcing the criteria. The subjectiveness is really the issue that we have. The ambiguity could lead to arbitrary enforcement and unintended censorship on platforms. They may over-moderate content to avoid potential liability, resulting in diminished experience for all users of all age, not just youth. But in particular, we're worried about those implications for Vermont's most vulnerable youth, kids that are queer, especially kids that are in unsupported households and environments that turn to social media platforms in particular for community, for resources, for guidance, for coming home from school after being bullied and they're turning to their friends online. Under the subjective nature and broad definitions of the bill, we're genuinely concerned that they will no longer have access to that information and those communities. I say that not just as someone representing tech in many ways, but I say that also as a millennial who grew up queer and used online services for that very reason, to find community and resources. We also think that these broad standards could be misinterpreted in ways to also censor access to things like healthy content. The idea of compulsively searching online might be misconstrued that an LGBTQ kid is looking for community. So yeah, they're looking online quite a bit, right? They're scrolling social media online. Could that be misconstrued to be compulsive? And if so, are they no longer going to have access to that community and resource? But the same thing for example, teenage girls with eating disorder content, which obviously we are very opposed to. But the way that the bill is drafted, it could be misinterpreted to include healthy content as well. Someone searching for healthy nutritional information, body positive information and community as well. Again, I say that from experience as a millennial who grew up in the dawn of social media. We know that that's definitely not this body's intention or the intention of the bill, to be clear. So we're raising these concerns as considerations with the unintended consequences. Again, there's an imposition of a vague duty of care. We very strongly feel like the right approach to online safety and social media is through digital literacy. I'm very much a big proponent that digital literacy in our K-12 education system should be kind of the next wave of our civics education. Not that we've necessarily gotten that right completely. However, I think that there's something to be said about really incorporating safe online behaviors, whether it's around misinformation, disinformation, or quote harmful content in our K-12 systems, because that's what our kids are accessing day in and day out, especially in a post-COVID world where we had kids spending years online learning. That was their only connection to resources and information. And a lot of our partner companies, though we do not partner with any social media specific companies, a lot of our companies like Google, for example, and Apple have really strong curriculums on digital online safety, for example, that they work with general public bodies to help implement. That said, I will caution, while we are not a First Amendment organization necessarily, I will caution that the other states, only a handful that have passed similar bills, have all been challenged in court and have had their laws struck down. Just in the last 2.5, 3 weeks alone, we've had Texas, California, and now Maryland. It's our humble opinion that Vermont taxpayer dollars would be much better spent doing things like increasing public programming and resources for the root of the issue that we're trying to get at, which is mental health and well-being for Vermont's youth, as well as for things like digital literacy, instead of having to defend a policy that is sure to be challenged in court against, again, a very right-wing Trump administrative judicial system, which poses a lot of challenges for a lot of reasons. That said, we very much are appreciative of the time, and we look forward to working with the committee to strike the right balance here. There's a lot of things that we can agree on for sure, especially around the priority of protecting our kids online, as well as setting us up as the next generation up successfully for online safety. But we want to make sure that we don't do so on the backs of some of Vermont's most vulnerable kids that quite literally use online resources as a lifeline. So some considerations for you, and greatly appreciate the time.
Good. Well, thank you for being here. And have you provided us written testimony?
I will provide the committee written testimony as soon as this afternoon.
Perfect. Okay. So questions?
I do, and I'm going to ask this just because I'm a lawyer.
Please.
Are you a lawyer?
I am not a
Okay.
lawyer.
So I
Public
won't-
policy professional, not a
I
lawyer.
won't put in the sort of legalese stuff.
We'll go easier.
Okay,
That's what
understand.
he's saying.
I did
I'll
not
just-
torture myself with law school
Yeah.
for that particular reason.
No,
I considered it. I considered it.
In Vermont, you don't necessarily have to go to law school to get for the bar.
And
It's
That's true.
just saying, don't move to Virginia, move to Vermont. Sorry, I got
Good to know.
got distracted. So, okay, so you said that it's a de facto age verification. And there's actual knowledge, which is what's in the statute. And then
We
there's,
appreciate
there's rulemaking that can be done by the Attorney General.
it.
You said you laid it out that it's a de facto. So how is it de facto if it's not even in the statute? So
Sure.
lay it out a little bit more. about
Absolutely,
what
absolutely.
what you mean, why there's age verification there.
Simply put, in practice, how do you either prevent youth from coming online, or to make sure that youth have access to certain features online versus adults if you don't know that age, right? You have to have some sort of way of knowing what kids are accessing, and by doing so, you have to have some sort of estimation of age, whether that is through an actual age verification, not in this language directly. The example, like I said, of either a parent uploading your birth certificate or you uploading your driver's license. Lots of problems with that approach because of the cybersecurity issue of your private data being in the hands of large platforms. But on the other hand, this is de facto in the sense that in some way, shape, or form, not just these social media platforms, but also online services, especially because that 2% threshold that's in the bill that I mentioned, they're going to have to estimate some way, shape, or form who online is, quote, an adult and who is a youth. Whether that is through looking at the content that they're streaming, whether that is through estimating their interests, but that has a huge margin of error, of course. Some adults like kid things, some kids like adult things. It's different between there's a difference between doing so, for example, like we do with ads, right? Ads are age estimated. Ads for toys are targeted towards what platforms think are minors versus ads for, I don't know, groceries or household goods targeted towards adults. But those are just estimations. They don't get it right all the time. And there's no liability factor that is a part of those estimations. That's the real issue here, right? Like, it's not a big deal if a kid is served something for a toilet manufacturer, but it is a big deal if there's
Just to be clear,
liability.
you'd agree that there's nothing in here requiring any company to actually know any age whatsoever.
There's nothing in writing black and white in the bill language as is that says age verification is required, but companies cannot implement the policies without having an estimation of age. You physically can't.
Yeah.
Hence the de facto nature.
They can choose to do it and they're gonna do it anyway.
They'll have to.
So they'll know, but that's their choice.
Well, they'll have
That's
to
right.
in order to comply, right? Because if not, they could be liable. If they don't do so and they serve quote harmful content to a minor, then they're
Go back to the
liable.
beginning when we talked about it's an actual knowledge.
Yes,
So if they don't actually know, they couldn't be liable. Correct.
correct.
Okay.
In court,
Thanks.
the issue, I
thought you were gonna lay it out a little bit more, but.
no, well, the
But I
issue
got
is
it.
that it's going, because of the liability issue, they'll over censor for everyone versus risking that liability.
Okay, so the actual argument is that. I'm just gonna say Amazon.
Yeah, sure.
Won't be able to sell to kids. And that's the problem.
It's not that they won't be able to sell to kids. The argument is more so that in implementing, in order to not risk having any sort of liability and accidentally doing so, they will instead just censor content for everyone. They will assume by default that everyone is a minor. If you're not requiring a company to actually determine that someone's a minor, which has a whole host of issues, by default, they will assume that everyone is a minor. To not risk it. It's not worth the risk.
Yeah, let me just respond to that and then go back to questions. We have not heard that. Yeah, I appreciate your statements. But we understand that there are ways of determining whether someone is a child, using, and it's not give us your birth date and, so you check a box
Sure.
when obviously that's easy to do wrong, basically lie. But it's more about facial features, that kind of thing. And the intent is that the company deletes that data once they've made that determination. So deleting that data is critical. It's just one of many data deletions that is important.
And we would completely agree that holding on to that data would be problematic for
Yes.
cybersecurity reasons.
Yes.
Our issue with things around like facial features and biometrics is again that there's a large level of bias simply.
Okay, which is another conversation.
Yeah,
Two
absolutely.
more questions. I just realized I could talk about this forever. So
We can.
we
That's what
don't
we're
have time.
My train's at 10 tomorrow. We can.
So the two questions, I'll just ask both of them. So you mentioned compulsive use and emotional distress is not being defined. Emotional distress is defined in Title 13, so I'm going to move on from that. But does your organization have a recommendation for a definition of compulsive use? And my second question is, you mentioned that there are parts in the bill that you do like.
Yeah.
Can you point those out?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Both great questions. I can absolutely get you some stronger language on compulsive use. Again, our concern there.
Yeah.
To be frank, we haven't seen any best practices of language, but we can surely help strengthen it. Our concern is the misinterpretation, especially when that would lie with, for example, the AG's office. And if there is, again, for example, a teen in crisis or something like that, who is appearingly to be compulsively searching for things like the Trevor Project's LGBTQ suicide hotline, for example. And what happens if then their quote compulsive searching or online social media use is considered to be on the negative side when it's actually quite the opposite. It's looking for.
There's some legalese in there that makes me not concerned about that at all.
Okay.
But like, do you have a line and section in the bill that you're like, this is good?
Absolutely. I have to show you the action. I do have a copy of the bill printed. Something that we are very happy to see in the bill.
Well, you gotta search that hard for. These-
No.
I'm just
Again,
kidding.
the
I'm
goal,
just kidding.
the goals are there. The goals are same. It's a lot around the definitions. I will be frank. And again, not the risk to Vermont of this being challenged in a Trump judicial system, to be frank.
I guess. And
Well, I guess
Madam
what
Chair, yeah, I'll
what
get,
choices do we have? That's where we are.
Yeah,
We're not
But
gonna.
I understand.
Yeah. if it's easier to just, you're gonna be submitting written testimony.
I will.
Yeah,
Point to the
those
exact,
things.
absolutely.
That would be good
Absolutely.
rather than just trying to sort of search through it right now.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, and if there are actual programs or algorithms that your customer, or no, your members are using that are helpful, that would be really good to know.
I
Because
would
we're
be happy
hearing
to share.
the harms are significant and the harms are real.
We,
They're not.
we
um,
agree, we agree, which is why, our approach is very much trying to get at the root, which is preparing and weaponizing our kids with strong digital literacy, with knowing the difference between safe, harmful content, and with providing mental health services and resources.
Right, which we also, value mental health
Absolutely,
resources, and
absolutely.
we definitely support digital literacy. But it's also gonna be, the companies are, they have the algorithms and the coding, and that's what's causing the problem. And so once kids learn about one system, then they go to another one. And I use a analogy with banking. There have been so many ways that financial institutions put things in different sorts of language and have different sorts of systems. And so the federal government had to come up with a form that says, this is what you're going to pay. If you're going to buy this house, this is what you're going to pay. And that form is really important.
Absolutely.
Because you have a amount of materials like this. So at some point, we know that a consumer, however well educated, should not be responsible to find this seventh little sentence in
Absolutely.
hundreds of pages of documents. So, and these are kids. I mean, these are children.
Agreed. And it's absolutely not our intention to be hardened against any sort of guardrails on digital content. That's the exact opposite of what we're hoping to do. It's a very nuanced and difficult topic, especially when it comes to the fact that all of these laws have been struck down. And so how do we balance? The last thing that I will just leave you with is there's obviously something to be said about wanting to protect the greater good of our youth. But please don't forget about those most vulnerable youth that do use social media for lifeline, for whether it's especially immigrant kids in today's climate, that it's their way of keeping in touch with family, tradition, culture back home, or the queer kids that, again, use these platforms for true community.
Totally agree. And they need privacy even more.
1000%
That's what
agree.
this is. It's also.
1000%.
All right. Well, thank you. Any other
Thank you
questions
so
or
much.
comments? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very
I look
much.
forward to following that.
Thank you.
And if you want to be a lawyer, come on.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will keep
Yeah.
it in mind. I don't know if I can handle your winters. I'm not gonna lie.
I didn't think I
You
could.
did say it was a
Maryland.
warm, you did say it was a warm welcome.
Right over, well, I'm born and raised in Baltimore, but I live right over DC border in Fortuitous County.
So I
Okay.
moved.
Why don't we go offline for a sec?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I moved from.